So, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to the session Mixing Colors, Adding Dutch Blue to Green Agenda for Western Balkans. My name is Darja Kragic-Kok. I'm a project manager at Netherlands Water Partnership, and it is my pleasure also to introduce you to our speakers today. Some of them are here at the round table, and some are also joining remotely from Albania and from different parts of the Netherlands. They're remarkable people, dedicated experts, all contributing to sustainability of our initiative from their own fields. And what can we conclude from these photos when we look at them? There is one conclusion: ladies smile more if you look carefully. Yes. So next slide, please. This is the outline of our session. We will start with just a short introduction of the Blue-Green City Dialogues initiative. Then I will give a floor to the Dutch Embassy in Tirana, who will say something about the role of the embassies in promoting Dutch technologies and know-how. Then I will also give a floor to the experts from IIG, who will also present us with the wastewater management in general overview. And then we will talk a bit about flood risk management initiatives that we work on currently in 3 cities in the region. They will be presented by City Forester. We have Martin joining us remotely, and we have Job also joining us in the studio here. And lastly, the first results of the study we're conducting on funding possibilities will be shared by Carnegie Consult. And in the meantime, I would also like to ask you to share your questions via the chat, and we will be picking them up. And then at the end, we will select some questions to answer because we have experts here on board, and it would be great to answer some of those questions. So why starting actually with this initiative, Blue-Green City Dialogues? Recently, Western Balkan countries adopted the European Union's Green Agenda for Western Balkans, and in this agenda actually translates the Green Deal to EU candidate countries of the region. We identified, you can see on the right-hand side, we identified water as a cross-cutting theme among 5 pillars of the Green Agenda. And for example, under the pillar 1, it's mentioned integrated climate models into hydrological modeling. Or under pillar 3, there is address local watershed problems, mitigate degradation of natural resources, and pillar 4, prevent pollution of water. We wanted to identify regional cities with similar water management demands and exchange experiences through the dialogues between the cities and the Dutch water sector. And we focused on 2 themes that were previously identified by the embassies and the RWO, which is a Dutch enterprise agency. And those themes are flood risk management and wastewater management. So next slide, please. We are cooperating within the Blue-Green City Dialogues with local municipalities, Dutch water sector organizations, Dutch embassies in the Western Balkan region, and RWO, which is a Dutch enterprise agency. Next slide, please. I would also just like to highlight who are the experts for the Dutch government working from the beginning on this initiative and who are co-creators of the idea. That is Jure de Bok, in front of the team Theo. He jointly also coordinates Blue-Green City Dialogues with NWP and especially brings expertise to project development phase. I would also like to mention Marike de Wilk, who is the business development coordinator for Croatia and Slovenia, and also Johannes Kirpestein, who is business development coordinator for Central and Eastern Europe, where also falls the majority of our region. So how did the process go? So here you can see what we had in mind and where we are at the moment. NWP and RWO, with support and knowledge of the regional embassies, contacted interested cities administration and Dutch water sector organizations that are active in the region on these 2 topics, flood risk management and wastewater management. We started by organizing several online city dialogues to identify demands of the municipalities and to co-create consortia around these project ideas, and in parallel to analyze the funding possibilities. And we will share some of these findings today and show how this bottom-up approach is working. So next slide, please. I would just like to highlight for the wastewater management topic which cities we had cooperating and which Dutch organizations were involved. We had cities of Belgrade, we had Bitola and Struga, we had Prizren, Teschen, and Trebinje, also in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also Škodra. From Dutch organizations, we were happy that we have Knowledge Institute also on board. That's AIG, Delft, and also we have TESA, AFMITEC, and UNICO, who are also active in the region. So next slide, please. On flood risk management topic, we had several cities and regions included. In North Macedonia, southwestern region, in Kosovo, Peja, Teschen in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Škodra in Albania. From Dutch organizations, here is the list a bit longer because we have Deltares as a knowledge institute, we have City Forster, we have HKV in line with water, Viteveen and Bos, and Ro Haskoning DHV. So yeah, that was my short introduction. I hope that if you have any questions so far, please just post them in the chat, because now we will continue with our program, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to Mrs. Aida Lahi. She holds a PhD, and she's a senior policy advisor at the embassy, the Dutch embassy in Albania. And she's just one of the committed experts from the Dutch embassies in the region, and she will tell us something about Dutch embassy's role in promoting Dutch technology and know-how in Western Balkans. Aida, the floor is yours, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Daria. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And on behalf of the embassies in the region, I'd like to thank NVP, RVO, all the organizers for spotlighting Western Balkans in this prestigious series of events. So apart from Embassy in Tirana, Albania, I introduce in this panel also my economic advisors at the embassies in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia. Our main role and daily work is actually focused in further strengthening the Netherlands' image as a knowledgeable and reliable partner in innovative, sustainable, and circular solutions. And we do this either by addressing the requests of the companies that are sent to our countries, so in a more kind of reactive approach, or by indicating opportunities through sectorial and market studies. And we try to strengthen these ties through several financial instruments at three main levels, like government to government, business to business, and knowledge to knowledge. Of course, there are a variety of cooperations that include also interaction between these main levels. And later in this session, you will listen to practices from local government to knowledge, or from business to local government examples, and these are indeed encouraged from us as embassies. So next slide, please. In this context, I would like to explain a little bit what we have noticed actually in the last years, but specifically after the pandemics. We do see a general increase of interest from Dutch entities, mainly due to the nearshoring approach. During the pandemics, the awareness of supplier dependence and influence on the supply chain has increased, resulting to a more nearshoring than ever. If we refer to the World Investment Report of 2020 on international production beyond the pandemics of United Nations, the Western Balkans region is the first obvious choice for European companies that are planning to nearshore their operations. And of course, Western Balkan countries are located in close proximity to the EU, both geographically and culturally. They have the lowest wage costs on the continent and are perceived as having a skilled and educated labor force. Sure. However, the region has some shortcomings. Governance and institutions in the Western Balkan region are still weak, and infrastructure needs to be improved. And to fully benefit from potential nearshoring trends after the pandemics, Western Balkans economies are working together with EU partners as a need to maximize their advantages and minimize their weaknesses. And if you go to the next slide. Yes, and in this context, the reforms from the governments, from all these governments in this region are driven, of course, by the EU integration process. On the other side, EU has also shown commitment through several financial packages in the Western Balkans, and I'd like to highlight the economic and investment plan. Thank you for the Western Balkans for being the biggest ever, and is adopted by the European Commission in October 2020. This plan actually aims to spur long-term economic recovery of the region, support to a green and digital transition, to foster the regional integration. And in this context, the EU is mobilizing up to 9 billion euros of funding in investment flagships in the areas of transport, energy, green and digital transition to create sustainable growth and jobs. So this plan should help the Western Balkans into to become one of the most attractive, or at least the ambition is to become one of the most attractive regions for investment in the context of the nearshoring approach that was mentioned before. And in addition to this EU significant funding, the EU will mobilize other 20 billion euros in soft loans and guarantee funds for the investors in the next decade. And of course, this comes with the green agenda for the Western Balkans, which is local or regional contextualization of the EU Green Deal. So due to these two important pillars, nearshoring and EU integration process, but crossed out with the need of the Western Balkans to recover in a sustainable way in line with the green agenda for the Western Balkans, I would like to highlight the commitment of our regional economic team at the Dutch embassies in the region. So if we go to the next slide to shortly introduce you to our team, these are our colleagues. Just to highlight that our doors are open. Contact my colleague Leila in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Ivan, responsible for North Macedonia and Kosovo, and our new colleague actually, Bojana, for Serbia and Montenegro. She will be starting from mid-November. So we are all aware that addressing blue-green challenges and mixing the colors and adding Dutch blue to the green agenda could not be more timely than these days when our leaders are engaged at COP26 Climate Summit. Of course, inclusivity and local-led actions are crucial. Therefore, we are here as a team to support the translation to these big policy priorities into local initiatives. And we are also aware that climate risks and water challenges know no border. Therefore, our corporation should do the same. Once more, feel free to reach out to us, and I am available for any further question. Thank you, and back to you, Daria.
Thank you so much, Aida. And also for everybody, also this invitation, if you have any comments, remarks for Aida or her colleagues in the region, they are really, they have been instrumental in helping us starting this initiative. So thank you so much also to explaining about your role. Now we're moving on with the session further, and I would like to give a floor to Professor Brejanovic, who is here in front of IAG. He's one of the most renowned experts in the world in the field of sanitation and sludge management, and he will tell us something about challenges and opportunities in wastewater treatment sector in the Western Balkans. Damir, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daria, for nice words. So I will spend a few moments introducing my institution. Actually, I'm working at two institutions, at IG Delft Institute for Water Education and Delft University of Technology. But here I'm representing the IG, the largest capacity building institution in the world in the water sector. And with the region, we have a long-lasting relationships going back into 1961, where we started our first course on sanitary engineering. It's called European Course on Sanitary Engineering, where Professor Kurpiel, my professor from Sarajevo, was in the first class. And through him, many generations at least in Bosnia, but also in other countries, were impacted by the Dutch knowledge already in that time. So since then, I think we have a couple of hundreds of graduates from the region, from all countries. But we operate all over the world, more than 23,000 alumni from 190 countries. So, and we also employ staff from the region. So we can say that we speak regional languages. In the past, we had probably about 10% of academic staff coming from the region, now a little bit less. Next slide, please. So Aida already introduced a lot of opportunities, and I think opportunity which is given by the Dutch Blue to Green Agenda is just one of the facilitators and accelerators in that region. It is correctly identified as a region in Europe which will probably have the highest growth in terms of investments in infrastructure for wastewater and flood protection. So it is a positive that in the region there is more and more awareness of environmental protection. So I hope that also this event today will help in that direction. It is I would say, sustainable market size, because when I looked into different country plans, you find out that countries are investing or planning to invest billions in the area. So when you put it together in the 6 countries that we are talking about today, we expect investments of about maybe up to $10 billion or euros. And that are several EU initiatives and plans. We will hear later about that. So I won't spend my time on it. And the country strategies are really ambitious. Just to mention that, for example, I was in Serbia recently, and I heard from the premier of the country that there are plans to invest into building up, 200 wastewater treatment plants of different sizes, starting from 2,000 person equivalent to Belgrade size. And Belgrade is number 20 city in Europe by size, doesn't have a wastewater treatment plant, so it's a capital project. But there are also other capitals that I would mention later, which also needs to have a plants. At this moment, only Sarajevo and Tirana have treatment plants as capitals. Skopje and Podgorica are in the process of having ones, Belgrade as well, and in Pristina also there are plans. So we expect high volume investments. We will hear about that. And what is interesting that in terms of technology, we, at least personally, I would like to see a bit more diversification in approaches, which would also include green infrastructure and blue infrastructure rather than only going into gray infrastructure, and diversifying technologies in terms of nature-based solutions and natural systems and decentralized systems. And definitely capacity. Countries probably have a feeling that they are fine in capacity because they still didn't experience the peak in investments. And once this peak comes, then it's too late to build capacity. So the capacity has to be built now. And definitely there is a lack in capacity. And I think I am qualified to say that, coming myself from the region and knowing the situation there. Maybe it sounds not very modest, but I think I can make such statement. Now the challenges, now there's a long list, and I wouldn't like to, these are things which are known to people, but still people think that insufficient coverage with sewage is necessarily the disadvantage. But we have to see it also as advantage, because we don't have to cover everything by sewage, because there are very beautiful solutions for non-sewage sanitation. Many cities are without sewage treatment. That is unacceptable, and we are aware of it, and we are working really hard, and countries are, especially the countries which are with ambitions to join European Union, are under such pressure and exposed to such thinking. I've been involved, or actually I've seen developments in Romania, in Croatia, and in some other countries where you see that the EU is really putting lots of help and pressure on building wastewater treatment plant infrastructure. The existing plants are often old and outdated, so it's another thing that even if the plant exists, it doesn't mean that it operates according to standards, not even a country standards, but also definitely not according to coming EU standards. And specifically when we talk about nitrogen and phosphorus removal, many plants, majority of plants don't have a tertiary treatment. Traditional approaches still prevail, and that is my biggest problem. How to change the paradigm, how to change people's minds to depart away from traditional, well-proven approaches, but maybe outdated and not really applicable to the local conditions. Lack of human capacity and expertise, I mentioned already, coming a big issue. We have to work hard on it. And the one which is a problem, it's like chronic syndrome, lack of plant operators. So difficult to get these guys, so difficult to get them in and to keep them at their job. And about financial sustainability, we are mostly really orientated to how to get money to build things, but not yet aware of the operational maintenance costs, and especially about the cost related to residuals, and residuals like a sludge waste sludge actually, which still has to be managed after management at the treatment plant. So what to do with that is a big issue, even in countries like Croatia and other countries who are considered a little bit more advanced and ahead of the rest of the region. So waste sludge management is often overlooked, and I cannot point it out more to this problem, because maybe at the beginning it's not a problem. As soon as you reach your storage capacity somewhere, you run into this expensive problem. And unfortunately, there is no platform to exchange experiences between experts. There are some platforms, but not a structured platform that could follow these large plant investments. And last slide, seeing the time, I will try to push it in a minute. The chances are, I think, really big for the Dutch sector. What is important that the Dutch companies, the Dutch institutions have excellent status in the region. So they have built over the last decades a great status. So we should build on it and we should use it. And I have a feeling that we are still not using it to the full extent. It is a substantial market size. So we are talking about plant size from anywhere from 2,000 person equivalent to 250,000 person equivalent. And I think this range is, so there are small to medium sized plants where the Dutch could have really opportunities to enter into this, and especially for medium and small enterprises in the Netherlands. I'm not talking about mega treatment plants like Belgrade and others, because there I think there's much bigger competition coming from France, Austria, Germany, and China in the region. So I don't think that we have much chance there. Could be, but there's much more chance in small and medium, and that is the area where will be the most investments. And specifically, don't look only on centralized systems, but also in decentralized systems in the fecal sludge management and septic sludge management, because this is total market that is totally overlooked, also by local people. There is a lack of understanding that a sewage is different than a fecal sludge and septic sludge, and you cannot drop it at the same treatment plant, which is designed only for sewage treatment. And two more possibilities: technology transfer, because the Dutch, we here in Wageningen, in Delft, but also in other cities, are really global champion in innovations. If you take a look, in last decade, the 90% of innovations happened in the Netherlands in the wastewater treatment. I don't want to mention certain companies and institutions, but believe me, if you look for that, we are really a place to be consulted, and that's what the market needs there. And the last one, knowledge transfer and capacity development. My own institution we are doing it as a professional institute, and we are really open and willing to cooperate with local institutions and to build a capacity in the professional sector, and also to work very closely with academia, where we have some plans for a long time already, and we are waiting now for fertile soil to implement such activities. So we are open. Please contact us, and we are often in the region. We have excellent contacts with the embassies and with other stakeholders, with governments. So I'm open, and please contact me or Daria if you have any wish or need for that, to do that. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Daria. Thank you for this nice overview, and also to highlighting also the chances for the Dutch water sector and for the organizations. And also to mention which are the topics actually that are very important for the region and often overlooked, even in the Netherlands, actually, talking about the sludge management. So thank you for that. If you have any questions, I would just like to also to remind you to bring your questions to the chat, please. And also, I would like to move on with our session today, because we have remotely joining us from another city in the Netherlands, Martin, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to him, because he's one of the creative brains behind and co-founders of the City Forester. They, among many other projects, they're co-creating amazing public places with multiple purposes in the Balkan region. And how does this relate to flood risk management and case studies in Pe and Shkodra? Well, let us find out. And Martin, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Daria. Thank you very much. Thank you also for the ability to address you here. Indeed, my name is Martin Sobota. I'm one of the founders of City Forester. I'm not going to spend much time on advertisement, but so we are an architecture and urbanism company, but which, let's say, is focusing kind of on an integral approach. So you see 4 projects here in the background, which all do always more than one thing. So maybe just to highlight 2 is one is, and they're all water related. So on the top left is a project some of you might know in Durrës in Albania, where we use the coastal defense element to create the public space. We've also done stakeholder workshops on tourism and agriculture, but we're working on inner city development on the bottom left in Bratislava, where water plays a big role, of course, because we're adding very high density, and we still need to take this into consideration. And on the right, I will show a few slides later, is one of the sponge city projects we've done in China, where we've been using, let's say, the river and the renaturalization of that river to kind of give new structure to the city. Next slide. We have now, let's say, through this Western Balkan dialogue, we have been now starting with 2 quick scans together with Royal Haskoning, DHV, and Deltares. Let's say Royal Haskoning being a big engineering company, and Deltares being a kind of a water know-how institute, and us as, let's say, spatial thinkers. We've been looking at Shkodra in Albania, and Peja in Kosovo. So what you see here in the background is not a country map, but this is the map of the Drin river basin, a very large catchment area, of course, very, very complex. The river alone has, I think, 4 different names. And I think what is very interesting about these 2 cases is that Peja is really at the spring almost. So this is really at the starting point of this river. And thus also dealing with, let's say, with the problems which are related to that. So it's very much rainfall related floods coming from the high mountains, and also increasingly, let's say, less melting water, but much more rainwater. So much more unpredictable and very short-term flash floods. whereas Shkodra is, let's say, at the delta of that river, and actually not only on one river, but actually of three. I'll come to that later, but with a very different set of issues, and we're looking into that now. Next slide, please. So Shkodra, as I was just mentioning, so you see on the top left, you see the flood risk. So the red is up to 3 meters flood that you see illustrated in the picture below. In 2008, I believe, was the last really big, or 2010, sorry, was the last really worst case flood. But of course, Shkodra with climate change is expecting that these floods will happen a lot more. And one of the big problems is that the water not only came in masses, but also stayed for up to 3 months, I believe. And with that, of course, destroyed not only crops, but even, let's say, soil, biodiversity within that soil. So it's very difficult to even regenerate that soil. And lastly, what we now, or what is also very interesting about this case, is that there's 4 dams on the Drin River which are leading to Shkodra. And obviously that is a kind of management problem, but we're now, for example, looking also into whether these dams could be managed differently in order to, of course, generate the revenue that everybody expects, but at the same time deal with flood protection measures. And that's not only a matter of timing, but it's a matter of sedimentation of the dams, what are kind of potential flow issues, and so on. Next slide. Next slide, please. Peja, on the other hand, is really kind of experiencing these very urban floods. As you see on the top left, these have also been dealt with in a way. So you see this raising of the walls of the river in the urban environment. But the municipality of Peja has now asked kind of, or posed the question, okay, can we somehow integrate the river better into the city? Because on the right, you see that the river is really crossing the city. It's also, in a way, the main axis leading from the train station where tourists arrive to the national forest, and has also a much higher touristic potential, and even just to increase the quality of life in the city. So this is what we're going to look at in this case. And next slide. To illustrate where this is going, so a bit the project I mentioned in Guitang in China. So on the left side, you see how in very different conditions we're basically, looking at the river and creating basically areas for the river to expand, but also to infiltrate. So we're increasingly not only having a problem of floods, but we're having in the same spot, we're having a problem of droughts in other moments of the year. So how can we maybe use the groundwater also as a buffer that needs to be fed in order to, in dry periods, also be, let's say, take out from it. Next slide. And how can we then use these public spaces, or these spaces which are meant for flooding, but how can they also be good public spaces which increase the livability of the city and add quality to the life of its citizens? These are some examples from all over the world. Next slide and last one. So I think, let's say the approach that we're using is on the one hand really an integrative approach, not solving one problem at the same time, but trying to really looking at sustainable development goals and simply quality of life to or citizen-centered design, let's say, to improve conditions. And we achieve that in a way by really thinking bigger, looking at the bigger picture, by trying to develop strategies and not plans. So open solutions which are also open for stakeholder discussion, and providing this kind of social infrastructure. And I think we will come to this later. One of the focuses of this study is now to really develop bankable solutions, so to try to enable municipalities to, let's say, with the strategies or with the, partly it will be plans or the scans, to approach lending institutions and to acquire funding for these projects. That's from my side. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Martin, for your super interesting presentation. Very nice to see how architects can help us also in solving issues such as floods and flooding in the region. I would now like to move on with our program and also introduce you to HKV and their expert Job Udo, who is a dedicated and knowledgeable professional with ample experience on the flood risk management projects worldwide. Will share with us situation and maybe ways forward for municipality Teschen in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Job, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I would like to say hello to our friends from Teschen, who I just saw just in the beginning of the session popping up. So I guess they're online. So hello, and I hope we'll talk soon. So next, let me first shortly introduce the company I work for, HKV. We are knowledge entrepreneurs in flood risk management and water resources management, a consultancy firm founded in 1995. We are with about 75 employees, and we have 2 offices in the Netherlands. We're internationally quite active, as you can see on the map, and the last, let's say, decade, the focus is mainly on Eastern Europe, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. So, today the topic is, of course, about the Balkan and the region. So, the reason why we're here is because we did quite some projects in the area. Amongst others, to the development of a flood early warning system in Bosnia-Herzegovina for the Bosna River, and also several projects which are related to the implementation of the European Flood Directive. And this is mainly related to flood risk management or flood risk analysis. Next slide, please. So then our particular case in this approach. This is Teschen. So obviously Teschen suffers from floods, mainly flash floods, but I'll come back to that later. While there are quite some flood early warning systems developed within Bosnia, the town itself is just outside effective flood early warning domain. Next slide, please. So if we look at, for Teschen, the case, what the approach is for this blue-green city dialogue. So it is a demand-driven approach. It's bottom-up, which basically means that the request for collaboration came from the town of Teschen themselves. So it is really great to have a client or a beneficiary that is really actively looking for collaboration in solving flood challenges. Then, of course, we have support from RVO and NWP. For this particular case, my company HKV, together with the Veen & Bos, and also, and this is quite important, a local consultant, which is a company called Voda Privreda. Together, we are now in the process of starting up a flood impact assessment, a quick scan for the Teschen town. The idea is to assess what are the flood impacts there, but also to look for potential solutions to mitigate that flood. And then secondly, also to look for scaling up approaches, because this is a situation in particular for Teschen, but there are quite a lot of towns and areas in Bosnia that suffer from similar issues. Next slide, please. What we are looking into more in terms of solutions is to to set up a specific flash flood early warning system, in this case for Teschen, but hopefully also for a number of other areas with similar issues. And within this quick scan, we will also look into specific flood mitigation measures, the more structural measures, let's say, if that is relevant, and also looking for scaling up activities. So that's what we're doing. We just started, so I cannot say much more than this at this stage, but hopefully maybe at new sessions that will come, we'll work towards, well, a bankable project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Job. And it's also a pleasure to have you on board on our initiative, Blue-Green City Dialogues, with your ample experiences in the region. Again, I would like to invite you all, if you have questions for Job on flood risk, early warning systems, flood risk management and early warning systems in particular, please drop it in the chat. We'll try to answer it at the end. And now I would like to move on with our program because we are coming, the time flies, and I would like to present expert from Carnegie Consult, who will say something about funding opportunities. And we're very glad to have financial expert like Sasha on board. She conducts a thorough study on funding possibilities for projects on wastewater management and flood risk management of municipalities in Western Balkan, also in the light of the latest EU policies for the region. Sasha, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daria. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity being part of this session and program. So my name is Sasha Huisman. I work at Carnegie Consult. I'm a consultant there. Carnegie Consult is an advisory firm that focuses on development finance and provides services to public institutions, impact investors, and the likes. Carnegie is part of Orchard Finance, which is a debt advisory firm more focused on the Dutch market. Yeah, I think that's it about us. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as Daria introduced, as part of the Blue-Green Cities Dialogue, I conducted a market mapping of funding opportunities for municipalities in the Western Balkans, and then with a specific focus on projects in wastewater treatment and flood protection. The mapping was conducted last month and is based on both desktop research and interviews with financiers and other stakeholders. Today I'm presenting the first results, and the final findings and results will be presented in a report that will be available later this year. Next slide, please. So this is a quick snapshot of the most active funders in the region, both providers of loans, some are providers of grants, others more of TA. Yeah, and I will go into more detail on that in the next slides. Yeah, the preliminary high-level findings for now, I think, was very clear and was also mentioned earlier in the previous presentations, is that there is a significant amount of funding available, especially from EU-related sources. So all countries in the Western Balkan are, of course, either EU member candidates or potential EU candidates, and that gives them access to IPA funding, so Instrument for Pre-Accession. IPA 3, that's the next phase of the IPA funding that will be applicable for the period up till 2027, is expected to have a budget of around 9 billion for the Western Balkan countries. More attention is expected for both wastewater treatment and flood protection. And this is also because of the green agenda that was mentioned earlier. And wastewater treatment is also a flagship segment of the economic and investment plan of the EU that was also mentioned by Aida earlier. Yeah, maybe just quickly looking on the right side. So this IPA funding is actually implemented by the Western Balkan Investment Framework, at least for the regional projects. So for projects of municipalities in both sectors that we're looking at, yeah, the WBIF will be the relevant organization. And this is basically an initiative that was established by the EU together with the EIB and the EBRD, which are the Pan-European Development Banks. And as part of this program, basically, the EU is supplementing the loans that the development banks are providing with investment grants and TA grants, also to make it more affordable. And since its establishments, also the KfW, the German Development Bank, and the World Bank, the CEB, and the French Development Bank have joined this initiative. So also they can supplement the loans they provide with the grants from the EU. And if municipalities or if entities want to benefit from the WBIF funding, they need to have the support of one of these development banks. So the funding doesn't need to be committed yet, but at least there needs to be some support from them and a potential for future funding from one of these banks. And then also the European donors, I think this, SIDA and the Swiss Development Corporation, SECO and SDC, are also grant providers that are quite widely seen in the sector. I think that's about the first finding, significant amount of funding available. On the second finding, what was also something that was obvious was that a lot of these funds are allocated to the central governments. So I think that's relevant for the municipalities, that often the access to funding is through call of proposals that are published by the central governments rather than by the funders themselves. There's a few exceptions, but this is the general picture. The third point is that, the general market feedback is that a lot of funding is available for the implementation phase, for construction and works, but for the earlier project preparation phases, it's not as widely available, whereas it's very important also to get access to the later stage financing. So this was something that was mentioned and that I will also get back to in the later slides. And the last point is that many financiers in the interviews mentioned that the funding becomes more and more performance-based, so that the release of funding depends on reaching milestones. And this can be either milestones attached to or tied to the projects, but can also be milestones tied to institutional development of, for example, the municipalities or water agencies. Next slide, please. Because of the point that I just mentioned, that the market perception is that in some stages there's more funding available than in others. We mapped the different funders across the different stages of the project cycle. So this is just quickly to show the kind of the framework or the setup. And here you can also see that in the different stages of the project cycle, different type of instruments are provided. In the earlier stages, it's more TA grants, and then in the later stages, it's more loans. Next slide, please. So these are the key, funders mapped across the different project stages. So here you can see that actually in theory, it seems that there's quite a few funders that provide the funding at the earlier stages. But still to access it seems more challenging also because these grant funders are often providing their grants as part of a bigger program, so that you also need to have the support of the banks. I think for the general picture is that the development banks, so EIB, EBRD, KfW, World Bank, are primarily active in the implementation phase of construction. They also do have some smaller pools of grant funding to support the project preparation, but there they rely most often on dedicated grant funders like the WBIF or the governmental agencies like SIDA or the Swiss. Then the last two I also would like to explicitly mention, so GIZ and the Austrian Development Agency, they specifically provide support on institutional capacity building. So often their own teams provide the expertise, and it's kind of an in-kind support that they provide. Next slide, please. So the next, basically the next two slides provide a more detailed overview. I think this presentation is too short to go into detail on this, but yeah, the idea is to, in the full report, have really a practical overview in which one can see the information per funder and funding program, and to understand the application procedures, if there's funding available, what the eligibility criteria are, to really understand how to tap into the different funding sources, because again, there's a lot of funding available, but how to access it is a different question. So the idea is to really make this a practical document that can be used to understand the different programs and application procedures. So here it will also be clear in which countries the programs are active, and what sectors, and the funding that's available, the instruments, and the size of the instruments. And I think what's also clear from these two slides, that there are a lot of funding programs, what I just mentioned already, where different type of funders cooperate. So for example, the WATSAN program in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's funded with a loan of 60 million from the EIB, with a grant from SIDA, and with a grant from the WBIF, so the IPA implementation framework. And this is a specific program that focuses on medium and smaller municipalities in Bosnia to improve water and sanitation. The call of proposals, again, is run by the government of Bosnia. But I think this gives a nice example where you see that the different funders are complementary to each other, and that they work through these dedicated programs, and also to show that there are programs specifically for the smaller municipalities, because I think often funders also look at bigger projects, so that it's maybe even more challenging for the smaller municipalities to access funding than for the bigger established cities. Yeah, I think that's it. If you're interested in the report, you can contact RVO or NWP, and again, it's expected to be available later this year.
Thank you very much, Sasha, also for trying to bring us as much as possible information in this very limited time that we had, but it gives us a good idea that what is possible and how many organizations are active in the region and in which project cycle. So, for example, now coming back to the questions and answers, well, it's nice to see that there have been some activities in our chat, and good to know what is happening in the region. What was for me, for example, from Sasha's overview and our research, is that only GIZ is actually investing in a project for operation and maintenance. That was the only
it's capacity building.
So that was the only donor that was investing in that aspect.
And then
from the last slide.
Yeah, and then specifically in capacity building, so they could support a water agency to improve their functioning or effectiveness.
Yeah. Okay, because that brings me back to the Professor Brđanović, what he raised also, the lack of the operators actually in the region. That is maybe that you see it as an expert, something is that will become an issue. Maybe not yet that the region fully realizes, but from our perspective, where we are at, we can see it. But I would also like to come back to one of your remarks about nature-based solutions and decentralized wastewater treatment, that you see it as a possibility for the region. Can you tell us maybe what would you like to see, let's say, from nature-based solutions and decentralized wastewater treatment? Which scale are we talking about? Yes.
That can be implemented at a small scale, but also large scale. Our institute is running at this moment probably the largest nature-based solutions EU project in Europe, called Reconnect. Mm-hmm. And I think there are a number of case studies across Europe where we are implementing innovative solutions and testing them, which is even more importantly, so that within a short period of time, we will have lots of knowledge on the scale, the way, how we can introduce, and what are the effects of such approaches. But definitely, I remember that long time ago I was working shortly for European Development Bank, looking into projects in Estonia and Romania and some other countries. And I know at that time that EBRD was really interested in other type of treatment plants than just a conventional activated sludge plants, including, for example, wetlands, and not necessarily as the primary way of treatment, but maybe as a polishing part of treatment, and introducing the natural systems, ponds and lagoons that we in the Balkans consider more appropriated for Africa or South Asia, more for developing countries, while of course the climate and other circumstances play a role. But I'm sure and I know that there are a number of possibilities, especially for smaller municipalities where there is sufficient space available around municipality to implement such approaches, which are not necessarily so high-tech, attractive, and full of gadgets like the most modern technology. But when you compare the cost effectiveness, that could be very, very interesting area for investment. And then combining that with the flood measurements and measures introduced in a nature-based blue-green composition. So I think it's very, very kind of complementary development with what our colleagues are doing in flood management.
Thank you. Thank you also for to bringing it back to the flood risk management, because I would also like to give to pose a question also to both Martin and Job about, because we saw Martin also nicely presented within the same watershed, but also Job also experienced that many cities are suffering from flash floods, and also for the cities that are from the smaller rivers that are currently not included in a big, let's say, early warning systems. How do you see this as an expert, and how would you like to proceed with scaling these initiatives that we are now doing for Teschen?
Yeah, well, I think it has to do with let's say the size, the time, and the budget available. What is interesting is that Teschen is inside the Bosna catchment, which is the river for which a flood early warning system was developed, but it's a minor tributary. And the focus of the first step in that respect, the Bosnian water authorities are doing, I think, quite an excellent job of a step or phased approach towards first starting with the bigger basins in developing flood early warning systems, and from then on maybe looking into smaller sections. But this is this first step of the bigger basins still. And I think the next step then is to start looking into the smaller areas, and which suffering more from flash flood-like issues. And for that, you need also different technical solutions and approaches. And as this is very likely the case in multiple areas, I think if we can develop a successful project for Teschen, it should be possible to replicate it to other areas as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you also for explaining better what is the situation currently. I would also like to ask Martin about something that he brought up, and that's about the TUR approach, which is citizen-centered, and about social infrastructure. And you said you'll come back to that. So we are running out of time, but if you could just give us an idea of what you're doing on that aspect.
Yeah, I thought I did that in my slides, but let's say what I meant was that nature-based solutions actually take a lot of space. So I think they are, in that sense, often, you could call that inefficient maybe, or let's say, but on the other hand, they are maybe more resilient. And that we think that there's a big potential to simply also do something else with that space. So to program space, not monofunctionally, but to do many things at the same time. And I think also to come back to your question about the small municipalities. I think the small tributaries are, let's say, that is the situation where I think you still can handle the problem relatively well with also, let's say, maybe a little bit softer solutions. And by that, I think you can avoid bigger problems that are only solved by very hard and big infrastructures later. So yes, it's about a bit more, it's a lot more work maybe, and it's a lot more small grain. But I think in essence, it's in the smaller scale, it's invested better, the money, I think.
Thank you. Thank you also for just explaining again what you meant with it. Yeah, I think that we are running out of time because our time is up. But I would just like to thank first all the speakers that were here and who also joined us here live. And also I would like to invite you not to miss the following some of the upcoming events. And that those are going to happen also later. One is going to happen later today. Some are happening tomorrow. So please check if there is something of your interest. Today will be about risk and resilience in the Americas. Tomorrow, water and agri-food. But also, I would like to highlight that we will have a Blue-Green City Dialogue speech in Aquatech in Amsterdam on 4th of November. So if you're on Thursday in Aquatech, please join us and let's make it take the best out of that situation, that opportunity. And you can also see the list of what is happening also in the coming days. And the next slide and the last slide, please. Yeah, it's not going to happen. Yes, there we are. So this is just to wanted to thank also the funders, and that's the Partners for Water program, and also to invite you if you would like to find out more about who we are. You can visit our website, Netherlands Water Partnership or Partners for Water or Dutch Water Sector. And I would really like to thank people who joined us today, our experts, also my colleagues from NWP behind the screen who made this possible, and of course AIWW for organizing this session. So thank you.
Thank you for the invitation, Daria.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time, everyone. Bye-bye.